Well, hello there. Welcome. We are coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liezle Wilson. Now, let's get into your headlines, perhaps before we get into your top stories for today. South Africa's COVID-19 positivity rate continues to drop. It now stands at 12.5% after 4,592 new cases were recorded in the last 24-hour reporting cycle. Eskom has warned that the country's power grid may come under additional strain over the first half of the year due to maintenance at the Koeberg nuclear power station. And tennis star Novak Djokovic has lost his last-ditch bid to stay in Australia for the Australian Open. Right, those were your headlines. Let's get into our top story for the look at the week ahead. It's only a few days, perhaps, until the matriculants of 2021 will know how they performed during their final examinations. Minister of Basic Education, Andrew Motshekga, is expected to announce the outcome of the National Senior Certificate examinations on Thursday. However, results will not be published on newspapers this year in order to comply with the Protection of Personal Information Act. Matriculants have mixed feelings about this, with some saying it will contribute to a decrease in the suicide rate associated with the release of matric results. While some say it is a long-standing tradition that should remain. Perhaps to divulge more, we are joined by the Department of Basic Education spokesperson, Elijah Mhlanga. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today.
Yeah, good afternoon, Liezle. Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
It's been an illustrious year somewhat, 2021. Perhaps as we await the imminent results on Thursday, perhaps you can contextualize some of the challenges that you as a department have faced in the previous year that you think might affect the quality of results that's being released this coming week.
Liz, the class of 2021 are the grade 11 class who did not complete their curriculum due to COVID-19. You remember that in 2020, schools were closed in March, and the last grace to return to school went in August of that year, which means for several months they were not in school. But we also, in that group, saw the grade 11s being affected, which means they came to 2021 without a full learning session that would have taken place because of the disruptions that took place. And even in 2020, after schools were reopened, some of them had to close and open and close again because of COVID and the cases that were there. But in 2021, we saw some relative stability in that regard, that grade 12 learners were in school from day one up until the end when the exam actually started. So that helped somewhat. But we needed to do a lot more work to support them because we knew they were bringing a deficit from 2020. We needed to close that gap first and then continue with the grade 12 exam. So there was a lot of work that was put in place by provinces, but that too was not easy. So we had to appeal to members of society to rally behind the class of 2021, but we'll see what the results are going to say.
Absolutely. And speaking of support mechanisms, you've spoken about the class of 2021, believed to be the most hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Also looking at how some learners obviously were infected with the COVID-19 virus and couldn't study online, perhaps due to lack of resources and capacity as well. I wonder, given these challenges, what sort of support was on offer for them in that regard as well?
Yeah, what we did was to assist them to work even during weekends. In fact, even this year, we saw some provinces already by the 3rd of January, some matric learners were already in school learning. We saw same happen in many provinces in 2021. But what we did over and above weekend lessons, during school holidays, we asked the grade 12 learners to continue to come to school, and we created camps. They were either camping at school or they went to remote venues which were made available by provinces. And also the deployment of remote learning programs by the department in partnership with SABC, for example, when it comes to the WASA Matrix program, we actually assisted them to access learning material to learn even remotely when they were home. And we also had zero-rated platforms where they were able to access material and work together with their friends through study groups. So we did a lot of work to support them because we understood that this class was in greater danger than any other class before them. So we hope that all of those efforts and strategies that are put in place are going to assist them to pass and pass well. That's our prayer, and that was our plan.
Absolutely. And obviously the work does not stop, because once the results are issued, I mean, more support perhaps also needs to be an offer for those who didn't or who failed to meet the criteria, perhaps also those who need to enter university and other tertiary institutions. But maybe before we get into that issue, another recent development that we also heard was the issue surrounding the Protection of the Personal Information Act. The department coming out to say that they will not be publishing the results this year. Obviously, mixed reactions coming through, some saying it's a long-standing tradition, others feel that it's a way to decrease suicide rates. But SANEF, the South African National Editors Forum, also echoing their sentiments, saying that they're disappointed by the Department of Basic Education's last-minute decision. I wonder, in lieu of the meeting that also happened earlier today, what's the latest regarding that?
Well, that's correct. We had a meeting with SANEF. It concluded 30 minutes ago. It was not a long meeting because everybody understood the complexity of the matter. The Director General, Mr. Matanzi Mamweli, led that meeting and confirmed to SANEF leadership that the department was facing a very complex and difficult decision to make following the implementation of the Protection of Personal Information Act as from July 2021, and that they had an impact on the way the department was doing business, and that the department needed to consider the long-standing tradition that you mentioned of publishing matric results via other platforms, including newspapers, but also having to comply with the act that is now coming into play. And he also mentioned to SANEF that we met with the information regulator, and we also met with our legal counsel to look into the matter to say, what is it exactly that we need to do? What is the correct interpretation of this? So he told them the work that we have done. But it's not just the legal issues that are involved. It's also the administrative part in terms of ensuring that the data that we have as a department is accurate and that we keep it safe and that people's personal information is not compromised in any way. So the position is that the department is in court. There's a litigation against the department, and we are saying that we're going to wait for the court to make a ruling in that regard, and will abide by whatever decision that the court is going to make. So that's where things are, and we will communicate same to the public.
Okay, and then this is obviously with SANEF coming out to say that it has negative financial implications for the various media houses that have prepped the way forward. So perhaps as we await that imminent decision, I wonder if we can then go back to the issue of support. Come Thursday, once the results are released, what sort of mechanisms and protocols have you also put in place to assist those as they receive their results, the psychosocial support, and then also as they head into entering the various tertiary institutions around the country?
Yeah, maybe before we even get to that, let's say that the results will be available at a school where the candidates sat for the exam, but over and above that, the department is going to make the results available on its website. You'll have to register using your exam number as well as the ID number, and then you'll be able to view your results prior to you going to collect them at a school where you root. So there are those two platforms. The one is on the website, and the website is zero-rated, which means whether you have data or not on your device, you should be able to access the website and see the results. We have seen already since the announcement this morning, we've got over 2,000 people who have registered, and we encourage more to do the same because it will enable you to see the results at the comfort of your own space. So once the results are out, you then look at them and see what they tell you. If you've done well, congratulations, you can then proceed to go wherever you wanted to go. But if you didn't, then you need to register for our Second Chance program, which is available to support learners that still need to upgrade or rewrite a subject or 2 or 3 or whatever the number it is that you will want to upgrade. But why we say they must go to school is because there are teachers there, there are other people. Do go with your family members as well so that you're able to get the support. But we have our partner organizations that are on standby as well, who will provide counseling. We'll make the numbers available on the website, but others are on our other platforms. So they are there to provide counseling. But we appeal to all our candidates to remain calm because the results are already there. Nothing will change. But harming yourself will not assist either. So remain calm. There are other opportunities that you could still utilize to improve your results. And we say, please go for that. It's at no cost to you. All you need is support from home, but the department has plenty material on various platforms that will assist you to progress and go on with your life in whatever way that you wish.
All right, Elijah, let me wrap up this conversation, perhaps just looking at the unprecedented times the country found itself in during the COVID-19 pandemic and the lessons garnered during, these past 20 months or so. What are some of those lessons, perhaps, that are going to be utilized for the next cohort for 2022 and beyond?
Good question. The first one is that let's get teaching from day one, because that's very important. We saw that in 2020 when schools were closed. Some schools were far ahead in the curriculum coverage and others were behind. And when schools reopened, others were able to still finish the curriculum as though there was no crisis. So if you work effectively and earnestly so from day one, then you are able to assist your learners to be comfortable whether there's a crisis or not. So it's very important that we respect time in classroom. Teachers need to make sure that they're in classroom on time every time. Learners as well, please arrive on time so that teaching can get underway. But the second thing is that we need to support learners. We need to check if they have any challenges so that they are not left behind. And the third one is that let's please comply with the COVID-19 protocols because they will save our lives. But also let's go vaccinate because that too will contribute in creating a safe environment in our schools, inside the classroom and elsewhere. Let's also make sure that we keep that social distancing. But what's even more important is the mask that we must all have and we must wear it correctly.
Absolutely. Elijah, you've spoken, and I noticed it was the last question, but it brings me to another point. So we've spoken about the education system and the vaccination drives as well. But I remember also reading about the possible change in the history curriculum, which was perhaps also deemed not fit for purpose in helping children understand who they are. In view of that, going forward, when are these changes going to be implemented? What exactly is it going to focus and look like?
Well, the change is coming soon. The minister appointed a ministerial task team a few years ago. They presented a report. The first part of their work was to check if indeed the curriculum needs to be rewritten. And the report was yes, needs to be rewritten. And then the minister reappointed that same team to start the work of rewriting the curriculum. So they've been doing that. They presented the first report. They are currently doing the writing right now. But again, we need to say that was also a process that involved every stakeholder in the sector and outside the sector who had a contribution to make. So that is coming. The minister at the right time will make an announcement in terms of when that is going to happen. But the work is continuing. History is very important. We need to know where we come from, but we also need to acknowledge all the people who have contributed over the years, some of whom have never made it into the history books. We need to bring them onto the main stage so that they too can be acknowledged, so that we can have a correct reading of what really happened before we got here. But not just for us, those that are coming after us as well. They need to have a good account of what took place for the country to be where it is today.
Absolutely. To know where we're going, we have to know where we come from. Elijah Mhlanga, I want to thank you for your time. Again, the Department of Basic Education spokesperson, Elijah Mhlanga, chatting to us on the week ahead. This, of course, as matriculants of 2021 will know how they performed during their final examinations come Thursday. On that note, let's take a quick ad break. We'll continue with more news and updates on the other side. We'll be right back. Right, welcome back. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liezle Wilson. Let's continue with more news at the SAWA. The Hawks Serious Organised Crime Investigation Team based in Bloemfontein is now investigating a case of business burglary, trespassing, malicious damage to property and intimidation following the arrest of a 27-year-old man by the Parkweg police in the Bloemfontein SAB premises this morning. It's alleged that in the early hours of today, a security officer at the Bloemfontein SABC building noticed that there was an intruder inside the building and requested backup from other securities. It's also further alleged that the suspect attacked the security officials, and one official managed to pull out his official firearm and shot the suspect. It's a developing story, of course. We'll continue to monitor and update as it unfolds. In other news now, Eskom has warned that the country's power grid may come under additional strain over the first half of the year due to maintenance at the Koeberg nuclear power station. Koeberg's Unit 2 will be taken offline for 5 months from tomorrow for regular refueling and maintenance outage. This will be the 25th refueling outage on the Unit 2 since commissioning, and it will also see the replacement of the Unit's 3 steam generators. While Koeberg's Unit 1 will be taken offline after that for a similar amount of time. To contextualize and unpack more, we're joined by energy expert Ted Blom. Ted, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon.
Let's look at what's transpiring, perhaps in lieu of this information, and ultimately how this is going to affect the country. How does the country begin to prepare for this?
With great difficulty. I think everybody had hoped that Eskom would have used the Christmas break to refurbish enough old plant so that there wouldn't be any further interruptions with the going down or offline of Koeberg Unit 2. They did boast that they brought in an extra unit at Kusile at the end of last year. But when I look at the statistics, it doesn't bode well. I looked at the statistics for last night, for instance, Saturday, and it seems to me we're heading for big trouble. Last night, the demand was just over 26 gigawatts, and it seemed to me that Eskom was forced to burn 12 OCGTs last night, despite on paper having adequate installed capacity of over 48 gigawatts of generating capacity. So there's something remiss there. I don't know what the problem is within Eskom. You can't, claim a return from the consumers in terms of the tariff for plant that's not serviceable. And that seems to be the ongoing trend. And it seems to me there's a great weakness within the regulator, NERSA, to actually get on top of the situation. In fact, the largest component, if we can just digress for a second, the largest component of the tariff is the return on assets. Eskom claims to have 1.4 trillion rands worth of assets, and that has never been audited. The biggest number in Eskom's makeup of cost for the tariff has never been audited. And I think that's a national disgrace. So that comes back to what's available and what's not available. And we seem to be heading for very dark times. In fact, it seems to me the jockey at Eskom is about to break his own record for 3 years in a row of having the worst load shedding in the 100-year history of Eskom.
All right, so Ted, you've said quite a mouthful. You've spoken about the demand, the tariffs, and also the lack of, of a baseline report somewhat in declaring the assets. Let's go back to the issue of maintenance, perhaps before we get back to that. Long maintenance, when we look at what this exactly entails and how long this particular restoration is set to last, what is in the process of replacing which moving parts? What are the implications of this for Eskom and consumers at large?
Okay, so the so-called routine maintenance that Eskom referred to is not quite routine. It's a once-off refurbishment or life extension exercise where the guts of the unit will be taken apart and all the moving parts, all the consuming parts will be replaced. And then hopefully with a lot of success and good luck, that unit will be put together again. My major concern is that Eskom in the previous audit of that plant was unable to provide a baseline report to tell us exactly what assets or asset report, if you want to call it that, which will tell us exactly what's going on inside that unit compared to what's in the manuals. The last baseline report was requested, and at that time, it seemed to me, or it seemed to the compiler of that exercise, that there was more than 6 years backlog in the compliance documentation that is required to keep that unit up and running. And that is my major concern, is that if Eskom has not been able to do proper housekeeping and keep the baseline report up to date, then I'm afraid that it doesn't matter who you put in to go and do the refurbishment. If the reports and the status is in a shambles, it would be very difficult to start the job of refurbishment and to know what needs to be replaced and what doesn't need to be replaced. And that's a major issue. And if that's not sorted out, I've called on Eskom within 7 days to supply us with that report up to date, and as well as the safety and analysis report. And if that's not forthcoming, I will back all efforts to stop the reissuing of a license to Coburg, because it's basic safety, it's basic operating philosophy, and basic housekeeping, which is not in order at Coburg.
All right, so before we get to the issue of compliance, I wonder, in view of what you've just said, how is this going to open up a can of worms? How is this going to also impact the issue of corruption and bribery? And then in the same breath, how do we mitigate against this as we perhaps begin to move to replace these capital assets at large?
Okay, so, I mean, the problem within Eskom is that whenever there's a large capital expenditure, the fingers of corruption just cannot be kept out of the pie. We've seen that with Medupi, we've seen that with Kusile, we've seen that with Ngula. In fact, the Zondo Commission only did half a job because their starting point was 2010. And this corruption that those three stations I've just mentioned precedes 2010. It in fact started around about 2006 to 2008. So every time there's major capital expenditure at Eskom, there seems to be fingers that crawl into the pie and start stealing. And we know that at the coal power stations, the SIU has identified more than 178 billion rands worth of stealing, which still hasn't been sorted out, and nobody has been brought to book and put in jail. So yes, it's a major concern that even here at Coburg, it's the same organization with the same organizational culture, the same lack of controls, which doesn't pick up stealing and doesn't report that to the public and the regulator and its own shareholder, who claims also to not know of the stealing that's going on. All we hear from the ministry is the story of the misjoining of the dots. But we never get those dots brought before the court so that we can actually see justice being done. And that is my major concern about this exercise.
Well, Ted, last December, there were talks of Eskom implementing load shedding stage 8. It also comes after the Department of Environmental Affairs rejected Eskom's application to allow it to pollute more than is legally allowed. I mean, does this not further compound the pressure on the power supply? And in the same breath, should we be anticipating higher stages of load shedding? We're also looking at legal compliance as another issue in relation to nuclear. I mean, what's at stake here? Should we need to go that route and implement to ensure that it's done responsibly so?
Okay, so I mean, I think we're in such a precarious situation that some tolerance needs to be displayed. For instance, on the environmentals on the 16 coal power stations, the 16 gigawatts that's not compliant with the environmental laws, if that is enacted immediately, you're talking about 16,000 megawatts or 16 gigawatts of power that disappears off the grid. That's more than half of the grid. And in fact, that would be level 16 load shedding, if that to be enforced immediately. So we are sitting in a very precarious situation that, come hell or high water, Eskom, because it's so corrupt and incompetent, is not capable of actually complying with the available laws. On the environmental side. And I don't think one should take the environmental side more lightly than perhaps the nuclear safety side. But the fact of the matter is this economy needs power, and Eskom has disappointed us and dropped the ball and is in fact not going to be able to provide adequate power. So in the context of the environmental breaches and possibly the situation with units coming offline at Coburg, and the fact that even as at last night, Eskom was not able to generate adequate power without the OCGTs. I don't write off the possibility that we could be spending most of this year in load shedding mode.
Ted, let's wrap up this conversation. I want to actually look at the issue of tariffs quickly. Last year, the country experienced a record-breaking number of power outages. What are the chances that things are going to, get off to a better start this year? And in the same breath, what sort of scenarios are we anticipating going forward?
Okay, so, South Africans are desperate for good news, and unfortunately that good news is not going to come from Eskom. As you know, and as the public knows, there's an application from Eskom for at least a 20.5% tariff increase. In fact, the management at Eskom seem to be totally departed from the South African conscience, and to even expect those type of increases after the record corrupt increases over the last 14 years. And that's now starting to pinch. And that's why we've seen the municipalities actually now start waking up and writing to every Tom, Dick and Harry complaining about the high tariff increases. And the tariff increases are not going to abate the load shedding problem. The load shedding problem has been ongoing for a long time. Initially, it was coal shortfall, and there is still coal shortfalls. But now, over the last 10 years or so, 11 years since the World Cup, there's also been maintenance shortfalls. So, yes, my recommendation to every Tom, Dick and Harry in South Africa is that if you want power security and you want it at an affordable price, get the hang off the grid, because this grid is going to kill us all.
Ted Blom, energy analyst, thank you very much for joining us again. This on the back of Eskom announcing and warning rather that the country's power grid may come under additional strain over the first half of the year due to maintenance at the Coburg nuclear power station. We leave that conversation there, and once again, very grateful for energy analyst Ted Blom and his analysis. And in fact, that's where we're going to leave the show today. From myself, Liezle Wilson, and the team, it has been an absolute pleasure. As always, until next time, it is goodbye for now. Do stay safe.